Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for your introduction, Matthew. Today I'm going to be speaking wearing two different hats. The first is my academic hat. I've been specializing in weapons control and international security for a few decades now, but I also wear an advocacy hat of late, and it's a somewhat challenging role to mix the two, but in terms of advocacy, I am the co-chair of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, which was established in Australia in 2007. It is the first and the only time that an Australian-born organisation has won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I stress that this prize is given to the organisation, not to any individual, but for the hundreds and hundreds of people who have been working and continue to work for a world free of nuclear weapons. So what impact has the Summit for the Future had on this pressing issue? Well, I think I need to refresh the current situation for everybody because unfortunately, most people are not aware of just how bad things are in the world today. And I'm sorry to have to do this because this is what keeps me up at night. And much as I would rather tell you a good news story, we all need to be aware of these dangers and we need to be taking action and supporting governments to take further action. Climate change has been put forward as the dominant existential threat, but that is something that is of longer duration. Nuclear weapons, unfortunately, this is the second of the two most important existential threats. But with regard to nuclear weapons, this could all happen in an afternoon. All right, so we have an urgent issue here. We're also today closer to nuclear war, certainly than we've been since the end of the Cold War, around 1990, but arguably closer than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And this is what has prompted Secretary General to raise these warnings and flag the issue of nuclear dangers. Now, unfortunately, in the Pact for the Future, the resulting text actually doesn't make enough of a big deal of this, right? If anything, the text, at the request of the nuclear weapon states largely, I think watered down the importance of this, and it doesn't get the attention that it should be getting if we keep in mind that first point there. Now, we've got over 12,000 nuclear weapons. Many of these, most of these in fact, are hundreds of times more destructive than the Hiroshima bomb. Many of them are on hair trigger alert. We've also had a number of close calls in the past 60 odd years or so. So next year, of course, the 50th anniversary of the bombings in Japan. But since then, there have been dozens and dozens. And we've avoided catastrophe through luck rather than through any particular human ability or wisdom. Unfortunately, human error, technical errors, all of these things abound, and we've been lucky so far. And the problem today is that the nuclear weapon states, instead of reducing these dangers, be ramping them up. Many of you will be aware of the statements that have been made. Just a little graphic there. That circle, this one here, right? This is the Hiroshima bomb. Now that circle is that tiny little circle there. So this is the size. Thankfully, we don't have nuclear weapons quite this size, but they are still many hundreds of times more destructive than the Hiroshima bomb. So you can see the absurdity there. But this is the context. Just about every single arms control agreement that was agreed during the Cold War, confidence building measures, all of these have been torn up. And what is more, the great each other, they're not engaging in confidence building measures. They're not taking steps to keep those guardrails up. So we're actually in a worse position than we were 30 years ago, 50 years ago. All of the 9 nuclear weapon states are modernizing and upgrading their nuclear arsenals, right, rather than reducing them any further. All of them threaten to use them. We're familiar with, of course, the threats made by Russia, implicit and otherwise, to use nuclear weapons. Many people don't know that on at least 3 occasions, politicians in Israel have considered the use of a nuclear weapon in Gaza. But all of the nuclear states, by implication and in their doctrines, in their security doctrines, actually do threaten to use nuclear weapons. So this is a real issue. And as I've mentioned, the deterioration of relationships between the US and Russia, the US and China, NATO and Russia, India, Pakistan, Israel, Palestine, etc. All of these things add to the urgency here. And to feel even more disheartened for the day, new studies, new modeling has shown that even the use of 1% of the global stocks of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic impacts. Would have around 25 million people killed immediately, and then of course many more through radiation. But the climate impacts would result in the starvation of up to 2 billion people globally. So even if this was a regional nuclear war, a small nuclear war, if you like to call it that, the global implications are profound. Just a quick graphic here to show you who's got what. Some of those figures, the faces have changed, but essentially you can see the 2 largest nuclear powers, Russia and the United States, hold roughly 95% of the nuclear weapons held in the world today. So these are the 9 states. The first 5, you will see, also happen to be permanent members of the Security Council, but do not conflate that permanent membership of the UNSC with nuclear weapons. This is coincidental, right? After all, in 1945, when these states were given their seat and their veto in the Security Council, only the United States had possessed nuclear weapons. But you can see the problem here is that these are the very states where we need them to take action, but of course, given their position of dominance and privilege, it's very hard to get that action. All right, that's the bad news. Is it really that bad? As Russell mentioned, we haven't seen the use of nuclear weapons, thankfully, since 1945. We have had over 2,000 nuclear weapons tests, and these have had dramatic last, particularly on First Nations peoples around the world. So I don't want us to not note that. But in terms of a nuclear weapon being used in warfare, that has not happened. But the threats are still there. And as I said, we are closer now than we have been in decades. We could argue that of the 195 or 96 states in the world, only 9 of them have nuclear weapons. So the campaign to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons or to slow it down has been largely successful. But even though that's only 9 states, proliferation is always possible, and there are several candidates for becoming the new nuclear weapon states, and this is not good news. Some might argue that, okay, deterrence has worked so far. It's very hard to prove that nuclear deterrence itself is what kept the peace between the major powers during the Cold War, that it is still the main driver of non-nuclear use. It has had some part to play, but this is a very risky strategy. And we're seeing nuclear brinkmanship at a level that we've never seen before. Even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we did not have these totally explicit threats and aggravations and escalation of tensions that we're seeing today. I mean, if we look simply at what's going on between NATO and Russia, even in the last few days, this is a hugely frightening situation. And the provocations are utterly, utterly unjustifiable. There's no winding down, there's no de-escalation. It's almost as if there is a wish that, okay, let's do this. Let's actually have a nuclear war and see what happens. It's thoroughly frightening, utterly irresponsible. Yes, the nuclear weapon states have promised to give them up. They have all signed treaties. Well, they're part of, say, the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty and other international humanitarian law agreements which require them to give up nuclear weapons. And they keep saying that they will do this. They pay lip service. But efforts have stalled. We've reached a stalemate. And if anything, the nuclear weapon states are digging their heels in even further. They pay lip service to the idea, but at the end of the day, they are not taking the actions necessary. Great news, we had the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, and this now has 95 states who have signed up. That's good news. However, still have to see any of the nuclear weapon states give any support for this, and the allies of nuclear weapon states, mainly US allies, Australia included, have so far not signed up to this treaty. Although there is some glimmer of hope that possibly some NATO states, possibly Australia, we hope, will sign the treaty before too long. All right, so what did the pact achieve? I don't think anybody was under the illusion that there would be any great breakthrough, but nonetheless, even what was included in the pact was watered down and the language was very, very weak. I've listed Article 25, the main provisions, and Article 26. These reiterated the commitment to the goal of achieving zero nuclear weapons. And while it was good that there was no backtracking, there wasn't really anything that was new here, and it was done in rather vague terms. The Secretary General called it the first recommitment to multilateral nuclear in a decade, and that is correct. So I don't think it was a waste of time. It's necessary to keep these principles alive. However, the references, it was hoped that references that were made specifically to nuclear states to take concrete action, to increase transparency, to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their security doctrines. They've promised to do this. They've promised to take these steps decades ago, but they're not doing. And what is more, they're not talking to each other anymore. So arms control negotiations have gone. the idea of Biden picking up the phone and speaking to Putin, right, or Xi Jinping and saying, let's have a serious discussion about how we can de-escalate the situation, that's deeply out of fashion today. It's bizarre. It's bizarre, and that is not the way things should be. There is no dialogue on international security and the broader picture of the dangers here. Now, on the plus side, the UN is engaged in some other work, apart from trying to promote the Treaty on the Prohibition, of course. It has called for a further special session on disarmament, and importantly, it has launched a new study which will assess the impact of nuclear use. And this is the first time since 1989 that the UN has convened such a detailed report. And that's important because the scientific advances, the global modeling, is much, much better than we had during the 1980s. Unfortunately, what that global modeling has shown is that things are actually much worse than we supposed them to be. But this report, which is due out in 2027, will spell this out. It brings together a number of UN agencies to address this issue. So it's a whole of UN project calling on specialists around the world. It'll look at population, agriculture, environmental issues, of course, and address the psychological, climatic, economic, social, and political effects of a nuclear war. It will also examine the potential role that new technology will play in terms of how nuclear war might unfold or might happen by accident. In fact, the likelihood of a nuclear weapon being launched by miscalculation, by accident, is actually higher than that of it happening at a deliberate level. All right, so will any of this have much of an impact? Unfortunately, there is not a lot that is new here, and nuclear weapon states continue to resist such calls. And what is more, we saw that the pact was voted down by some states, including Russia and North Korea, who are nuclear weapon states, and some states abstained. I'll move on now briefly to the role of ICAN, and I'll talk a little bit about our ongoing work, Australia's position, and how this might involve any of us. The overriding issue here is that this is a huge crisis for humanity, but a small select group of states is holding the rest of the world to ransom. And a small select group of states continues to reject calls to move to zero nuclear weapons. There have been plenty of blueprints for how this can be done. Nobody's calling for unilateral disarmament. The proposals are for mutual, phased, balanced, and fully verified reductions towards zero. All right, so this is something that is it's feasible, it's not going to be easy, but it can be done. In the same way that chemical weapons, biological weapons have been outlawed, and then the usage and the possession has dropped over time to almost universality, so too is the hope of the Prohibition Treaty. But, as I say, the nuclear states have really stalled in this. And this is a crisis of multilateralism. It shows the limits of multilateralism when determined and especially powerful states refuse to take steps which will have a positive impact on the whole of humankind, right? Because as I've said, this is something that will affect everybody in the world if it does happen. So what can ICAN do? What do we do? What can you do? ICAN was established as an outgrowth of the Medical Association for the Prevention of War, which has been in existence for a long time. I've been working with them for over 20 years. And in 2007, that association formed ICAN. Its work was to raise awareness of nuclear dangers and to lobby and work for the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. And for this, and its role in getting the treaty, it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. We work with all levels of government, local governments, state, federal governments. We engage with them. We have now well over 100 federal parliamentarians who have signed the pledge to support the treaty, to work for Australia to sign the treaty, something with which Anthony Albanese actually promised to do in the Labour Party conference back in 2018, I think, or 2019. We talk to the public. We work with hundreds of partners around Australia and globally. And in fact, ICAN's head office is now in Geneva. We work with diplomats, with scientists, with lawyers, with politicians, with health officials, faith-based groups, youth workers, etc. So this is something that really involves a broad cross-section of society. Within Australia, polls have shown that over 70% do favour Australia signing the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And even though some throw the ANZUS Treaty up as an obstacle, there is plenty of work to suggest that we can remain an ally of the United States, should we want to do that, but on the basis of conventional weapons deterrence only. After all, nuclear, that word doesn't even appear in the ANZUS Treaty. So, there are studies, there are reports. There's a brand new report on nuclear weapons and climate change, which is available. You can go on to our website. So what can you do? Well, I'm hoping that raising awareness is something that we can all engage in. There are also issues about how we can make an impact here. We must contact our representatives. We must call for our government to take action on this. We must ask our financial institutions to divest from these weapons because these are now deemed to be illegal under international humanitarian law. I'll be happy to take questions later. Thank you.